Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Lovely to see so many of you here today. Thank you very much indeed for coming. Before we carry on, just a quick safety announcement. In the event of an emergency, there are two fire exits, the door you came through and one behind us as well. Basically, an alarm will sound, and if you see me running like the Blue Blazers, follow me. Could you please switch off all of your mobile phones as well at this juncture? Even if you put them on silent, if calls come through, the signal can interfere with the microphone, so if you could switch them off, we would greatly appreciate it. Also, another little announcement. You'll see there's a camera at the back of the room. This is another of the Peace 3 initiatives, and today's event is being filmed. It's going to be used in schools and for the Peace 3 initiative. So if any of you do not wish to appear on camera, just let us know, and we can avoid showing you. So if you're pulled a sickie today or doing the double, then let us know. The launch today is, of course, for Racism is Wrong campaign and Race Equality Month. Thank you so much indeed for coming here to the Newry Arts Centre for what promises to be a very interesting and informative event. I was delighted when I was asked if I would be a champion for Racism is Wrong, because it is exactly what it says on the tin. Racism is wrong, and our culture today is a multicultural society, and we need to embrace the cultures that we have in Northern Ireland. And it really is appalling when you hear on the news of the attacks and the abuse that goes on, and we hope that campaigns like this will do an awful lot to stamp that out. The event today is in the style of Let's Talk, and our panel will be more than happy to answer questions. Yes, you will, panel, which you have put to them. Some of you have been filling out these little cards. If you have any more questions, then do let us know, and I will be reading the questions out to our panel a little bit later on. I'm going to introduce our panel members fairly shortly, but first I'd like to introduce our host this morning. That's the Mayor of Newry, Councillor Mick Murphy.
Good morning, everybody. Minister Murphy, special guests, fellow councillors, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Newry and Moran Council, I'm delighted to welcome you here officially to the launch of Racism is Wrong campaign and Race Equality Month. All councils have a legal duty to tackle racism within the council area, and it is something we take very, very seriously here in Newry and Moran. We want our area to be a place where everybody, irrespective of religion or ethnic origin, can feel welcome and live their lives as they choose, free from any kind of discrimination. On behalf of the Council, I would like to thank Peace 3, Southern Partnership and Equality Commission for holding today's event in Newry and Moran, and wish all of those involved every success in delivering this campaign over the next few months.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much indeed. The Peace 3 Southern Partnership has launched this campaign as part of its Challenge to Change priority, and I'd now like to introduce the Joint Chair of the Peace 3 Southern Partnership, Dr James McCammack MBE.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Mayor, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I'm delighted to welcome you to Peace 3 Southern Partnership launch of the Challenge to Change priority Racism is Wrong campaign to coincide with the launch of the Equality Commission's Race Equality Month, which will run throughout November. We're delighted to be here in Newry, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for a very warm welcome. Peace 3 Southern Partnership was established in 2008 when Newry and Moran, Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon councils came together to develop the Beyond Tolerance Peace Plan. Challenge of Change is one of those 7 key priorities in the plan, and this priority It explores issues of prejudice and discrimination while promoting positive relations and challenging racist attitudes. This programme would not be possible without funding made available by the Special European Programmes Body, for which we are sincerely thankful. We have an excellent panel of speakers lined up for today, our Let's Talk event, which includes local politicians, employers, trade unionists, minority ethnic representatives. You will have the opportunity to hear what they are doing to tackle the racism and to ask them questions on this. So I look forward to a healthy exchange of views. I am conscious that we are covering a very serious subject today. Research has shown that the minority ethnic communities, settled migrant workers and travellers, experience a range of challenging issues affecting their well-being and everyday lives. And barriers exist such as language, lack of appropriate information, the lack of knowledge of rights and entitlements, isolation, abuse of employment rights, difficulties accessing services, harassment, prejudice, and racism. However, we're all heartened by the response of our anti-racism champions, call whereby we known people voluntarily sign up to say no to racism. I'm very pleased to see that some of them are here with us today. There is an old Chinese saying, "Together we are stronger." And in the presence of our champions, I think it very apt today that we set out to build a new future. Finally, on behalf of Peace 3 Southern Partnership, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. I would like to extend a special thanks to our minority ethnic residents who are with us today. Racism is wrong and will always be wrong. Let us all work with Peace 3 Challenge of Change to create an inclusive society. Thank you very much.
Dr. McCammon, thank you very much indeed. Now, I would like to introduce our panel members. Thank you all very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this morning. First of all, on the list is Jane Morris, Deputy Chief Commissioner, the Equality Commission for Northern Ireland. Now, Jane has worked as a journalist in Brussels, covering EU affairs, and a reporter for the BBC in Belfast, before taking up the post of Head of the European Commission in Northern Ireland in 1992. In 1998, she was elected to the Northern Ireland Assembly and was appointed Deputy Speaker in 2000. She currently holds the position of Northern Ireland Member of the European Economic and Social Committee. She runs her own communications and photography business and is also involved in promoting integrated education in Northern Ireland. She's also a member of the board of the Salvation Army and Click Sergeant Cancer Care. Conor Murphy MP MLA was elected as MP for Newry Armagh in 2005. A senior member of Sinn Féin, he has decades of experience. I can't believe that.
I don't believe it.
No, decades of experience as an elected representative in the area, having served as a Newry and Mourne councillor for 8 years. He was elected to the Assembly, where he chaired the Assembly Procedures Committee, was the Sinn Féin Chief Whip, and also held the position of Group Leader of the MLA team. At various times, he has been Sinn Féin spokesperson on education, equality and international affairs. Conor was re-elected to the Assembly in 2003 and 2007, and he's the current Minister for Regional Development. He's led the way in working with communities across the Newry and Armagh areas in order to bring about change and ensure that the needs and concerns of people and communities are highlighted and addressed. Kasia Garbel is currently employed by the Irish Congress of Trade Unions as Migrant Workers Project Officer. A national of Poland, Kasia graduated from University of Warsaw with a master's degree in English Studies and worked in her home country as a university lecturer and language teacher. Kasia has been living in Northern Ireland for 6 years, and for most of this time she has been involved in work with foreign nationals, supporting them in accessing services, language training and community development. Since 2007, Kasia has been working for the Congress, coordinating a comprehensive programme of migrant worker support clinics and advice. Kasia is also chairperson of the Polish Community Club Kultura and vice-chairperson of Polish Saturday School in Belfast. And if I just digress off the panel for the moment, with Kasia working for the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, I'm delighted my colleague Michael Fisher, who's a member of the NUJ, and as a member of the NUJ and Jane as well, the NUJ are fully supporting the Racism is Wrong campaign as well. Dr. Gerard O'Hare, CBE, owns Parker Green International and manages an extensive portfolio of Irish, UK and international property and investments. He's a visiting professor at the University of Ulster, the Harvard Graduate School of Design and chairman of the University of Ulster Foundation. Dr. O'Hare developed a work-based postgraduate programme for overseas students. He's also a board member of a number of prestigious organisations. In June 2009, His Royal Highness Prince Charles appointed Dr. O'Hare as his ambassador for business and corporate social responsibility. In October last year, Dr. O'Hare received the Lambda Alpha International Award for Urban Affairs. Dr. O'Hare is Honorary Consul for Latvia in Northern Ireland. He was awarded a CBE in 2009. His acclaimed chairmanship of Belfast Tall Ships 2009 brought 850,000 visitors to the city. A philanthropist, Dr. O'Hare personally supports many charitable programmes in South America, Africa and Asia. Linda Gordon, Head of the Equality Assurance Unit, Southern Health and Social Care Trust. Linda's been head of the Equality Assurance Unit, formerly Equal Opportunities Unit, since 1990. Linda's worked for the Northern Ireland Health and Personal Social Services since 1977 in various roles, having spent the last 20 years within the field of equality. She's worked through a number of key developments within the equality sphere. As head of the Equality Assurance Unit, Linda is responsible for providing an equality and human rights service to the Southern Trust. Her role includes coordinating and promoting the Trust's equal opportunity policy, disability action plan, Trust's equality scheme, conducting inequalities in health and audit to inform action-based plans, reviewing and developing new policies in light of legislative developments, developing and promoting a range of work-life balance policies, developing and providing training intervention, and the provision of specialist advice and information on equality and human rights issues and related matters. No small portfolio at all. Jerome Mullen, Honorary Consul to the Republic of Poland. Jerome is a highly successful entrepreneur and businessman with over 45 years' experience in various managerial roles across a wide range of industries and businesses. Jerome served as the President of the Newry Chamber of Commerce when he reorganised and rebuilt the structure of the Chamber, making it one of the largest and most active chambers in Northern Ireland. Jerome also succeeded in amalgamating the Chamber of Commerce with the Chamber of Trade to create a one-chamber organisation representing all businesses in Newry. He sat on the Council of the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and over the past 8 years, he's been involved with 3 other Chamber colleagues in organising a Christmas charity business lunch, which attracts 1,000 people and raises over £100,000 each year. Jerome's been a director of Clanrye Employment and Training Services since 1985, and he's been chairman of its board of directors for over 16 years. He's taken a particular interest in making people from the new member states of the European Community feel welcome and helped, where possible, to find good employment. Thomas McCall is Clerk and Chief Executive of Newry and Mourne City Council. He has a long and distinguished career with Newry and Mourne District Council, where he first started as a clerical officer in 1974. He was appointed as Clerk and Chief Executive in December 1999, having held a number of key positions in personnel and administration. A prominent figure in local government, Thomas was part of Newry's successful bid for city status in partnership with the local business community, and he's widely recognised for his pioneering work in strengthening local community relationships. And finally, Kevin Howard is a lecturer at the Dundalk Institute of Technology, where he teaches courses on gender studies, ethnic studies, social change, social and political thought. A graduate of Kingston University and Birkbeck College in London, and of University College Dublin. His primary research areas are migration, ethnicity, borders and borderlands. Interest stimulated largely by having spent most of his life as an Irish immigrant in England or an English immigrant in Ireland. He's represented the development of Louth Local Authority's Anti-Racism and Diversity Plan. So please, would you welcome our panel. The panel members are now each going to give a short presentation, and after each panel member, after the entire panel has spoken, we will then get round to your questions. And we're going to start the proceedings off. Jane.
Thank you, Pamela. Delighted to be here, and a very, very both valuable and important occasion, obviously the launch of the whole month and the coming together of all the organisations that believe in the same thing. Racism is wrong. Simple as that, as Pamela said. To explain a bit about the Equality Commission, obviously, of all that you've said about me, my role here is as Deputy Chief of the Equality Commission in Northern Ireland, and what we see as one of the key challenges, or the key challenge, is not only to ensure that people who come to live and work here are treated with dignity and fairness, that their contributions to the economy and to the wider society are recognised, and that they are accorded exactly the same respect, and I think everyone says this exactly the same respect as we would expect when we travel, live or work in another place. The role of the Equality Commission is under the Race Relations NI Order of 1997, and it's to work towards the elimination of race discrimination and promote equality of opportunity and good relations between persons of different racial groups, as written in the law. We undertake a very large amount of legal work, policy work, research work, advice and training in the field of race. We've decided to have Race Equality Month replacing what was Anti-Racist Workplace Week, and I think you can appreciate that it makes it a much more positive message. Not only is it longer, lasting longer, but also a more positive message, and that's important for us. I think in some of the questions you'll find this out, but sadly racism in the workplace is still prevalent. Last year, 12.2% of all our inquiries on race grounds were on employment in the workplace, 12.2%. In June, we launched our formal investigation report, and I was involved in this, the role of the recruitment sector in the employment of migrant workers. And it looks at the involvement of the recruitment agencies and businesses. And in fact, it wasn't all negative. It was a very interesting document. We talked about overcoming the barriers. Language in particular was the most important one. As I say, Race Equality Month, we're also talking about equality of access to goods, facilities and services, not just in employment, therefore. And I think you'll all be aware of the relatively high-profile case we supported recently in the nightclub where two people were denied access to a Belfast nightclub and subject to a torrent of racist and sexist abuse. And the pair were awarded the maximum £7,500 each by the Belfast Recorder's Court, which also awarded them costs. So that's the sort of thing that success we can achieve. Just finally, I've only got 2 minutes, so I just want to say that we're working towards changing the law. It's not perfect at the moment, and that's a role of the Equality Commission, to see the Race Relations Order, and I'd use the advantage of lobbying here, extended to ensure that protection from discrimination and harassment on the grounds of colour and nationality is afforded the same level of priority as on other racial grounds. Thank you very much.
Jane, thank you very much indeed. If I could now call upon the Minister. Conor Murphy.
Thank you very much indeed. And you're all very welcome to Newry. I noticed I'm down as MP for Newry and Moore. It's actually Newry and Armagh, which the people in South Armagh take great offence at, so I have to keep them right. I'm very pleased to be asked to speak at this event. It's an issue which I suppose as an elected representative is becoming more and more something which is brought to our attention, brought through our constituency offices. I suppose the basic judgment of any society is how it protects its most vulnerable citizens, its most excluded, its weakest citizens, and in many ways and in many societies the ethnic minorities and migrant workers are among the most vulnerable, most excluded in society. In 2006-2007, the PSNI recorded 936 racist incidents, and this was more than twice the number that had been reported the year before. Now, bearing in mind that 2006-2007 was probably at the height of our economic success, when their work was plentiful, and move that forward to the present day when work is less plentiful And inevitably in societies then, when there's competition for work, I think racism, particularly when there's a large proportion of people who have come to here seeking work over the last number of years, then that actually increases. So I think it's something that we must be very vigilant around. There was an Equality Commission report produced that shows that levels of intolerance were rising here, and I don't doubt that as the economic situation and conditions deteriorate even further, that may well rise. So I think while it may have been possible some decades ago to try and conclude that there was no racist problem here, I think that is no longer tenable, and we have to recognise the reality surrounding us. This part of Ireland has been branded the racist capital of Europe, and I think we have an obligation now under the Good Friday Agreement through the Assembly and all of the institutions to challenge that and to take that on head on, developing a Bill of Rights, moving towards a society which respects all traditions and places of value and respect for all human beings simply on the basis of their humanity. But we have a long way to go, and just because we have an aspiration to do this doesn't mean that it will be achieved. And I think that we have to recognise the reality of the situation that we live in. That doesn't condone it in any shape or form, but I think that gives us a firm basis for which to take action. We, in this state, imprison asylum seekers, those who come to seek sanctuary from persecution. We deny basic rights to migrant workers who have come from other lands to contribute through their work to the prosperity that we have enjoyed. And one of the most glaring examples of all of that and how we treat people was the Ukrainian woman, Oksana Sukhanova, whose legs had to be amputated because of frostbite. She contracted to sleep in rough. And she had lost her job, and nobody or no institution took her in or cared for her in her destitution. Last year, Robbie McVeigh, a noted academic, he produced a report into racism and the criminal justice system here in the North. It was commissioned by the Council for Ethnic Minorities, and its title was actually a question. It's called The Next Stephen Lawrence. And I think there are very challenging issues in that. He reports numerous interviews which talk of police failing to act rigorously in cases of racist trouble, not dispersing, attacking mobs, losing victim statements which have been taken, and urging victims not to pursue the issues for fear of retaliation and so on. So it's not merely there's an evidence of failure of prosecution or achieved convictions, but the prosecution service doesn't even keep a record of the progress of racist offence charges through its system, and therefore we can't reveal publicly just how successful or not we have been in combating racist crime. So I think there is much to do. The Good Friday Agreement had an aspiration and had institutional frameworks to promote tolerance and to do away with hatred and distrust and inequalities in our society. And that wasn't just for nationalists and Republicans and unionists or loyalists. That was for everyone who lives in this society. So there is an obligation through work around the Bill of Rights to get a very firm legislative-based rights system which can protect the most vulnerable and the most excluded in our society. And I think that is the job of work that the Executive and the Assembly will be judged by its either success or its failure in relation to it. Thank you very much.
Minister, thank you very much, and apologies for moving your boundaries again. If we could move now to Kasia.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here to represent the trade unions. The message of this year's campaign is racism is wrong. But racism also has many forms, many different forms. The one that usually gets loads of coverage in the media is the racist attacks, and then we all shout in protest, racism is wrong. Another form of racism is obviously institutional racism, and this is something we don't talk about too much. Recently we had a case with HM Revenue and Customs when some of the records of foreign nationals were falsified, and that prevented them from getting child benefit. That's another form of racism. Another form of racism that we don't talk about almost at all is exploitation. And this form of racism happens every day across all workplaces, majority of workplaces in Northern Ireland, and this is the experience that I have working for the Congress. I started in 2007 in response to Robbie McVeigh's report, migrant workers and their families. This report showed the extent of exploitation and mistreatment of migrant workers here in Northern Ireland. So my job with the Congress was to start to address this somehow. So we work on various levels. We promote workers' rights among migrant workers, let them know what is right, what is wrong, and how they can oppose ruthless employers, and how in their workplaces then they can stand up for their rights. We will publish migrant workers Your Rights at Work manual that let migrant workers know what their rights are in order to be more aware and to be making more informed choices. Also, we represent migrant workers if they have problems at work. We go to their workplaces and we talk to employers and represent them, and we let them know that this is wrong. And as trade unions on a more strategic level, we always campaign for migrant workers' rights, and we oppose racism in all its forms.
Thank you very much indeed. Jared, if we could turn to you now, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I didn't know quite how I'd prepare for this today, so I thought I would just tell you a story of my one and only time that I experienced racism. It was many, many years ago, and in fact it was a double whammy, because as well as being a victim of racism, I was also guilty of being racist. And it's just over 3 decades ago when I was first a young 18-year-old student going to university there for the first time. First time I'd been out of Ireland, in fact, at that stage, and my kids were great laugh at that nowadays, because by the time they're 18, they're out normally every month out of the country. But it was the first time in those days that we weren't all travelling the world at that time to leave Ireland. And it was my first day in Nottingham, in fact, and some friends had dropped me off in the city centre and said, there's Debenhams, there's Victoria Shopping Centre, there's Broadmarsh on the bus station, there's Maid Marian Way, well, it is Robin Hood country, and you can get a bus back there, and or a bus from over there. So after having some amazing experiences that first day, because first of all I went into Debenhams and the concierge opened the door. I had a bag with me, I think a sports bag with me, and I opened it for him and he looked at me. Because in those days, of course, every time you went into a shop here, you had to open your bag to see if you were carrying a bomb. And suddenly he didn't consider me a bomber. And that was the first experience. The second experience was the wave of people passing through that city centre, generally from one shopping centre to another. We've never quite reached the same numbers between the Buttercrane and the Keys, but we're hopeful. But on that occasion, it was a wave of people, and one, perhaps not quite shocking, but one thing that I did notice immediately was the number of blacks and coloured people who were in those waves. And I remember noting that. And I remember going into the Victoria Centre and noting particularly the young people standing around in groups, particularly the black young people standing around in their gangs. And it's paradoxical almost, because I remember how I felt then, a little bit uncomfortable, how I now promote young people from the Albions and Colemans and the Sacred Heart to stand around our Keys Mall on a Friday afternoon, because they're our future customers for the weekend. And that's just a paradox. Anyway, having done my bits and gone back to Maid Marian Way to get the bus back to my digs, I stood waiting for the bus to come, and 3 black people came up towards me, young people, about the same age as me. 2 guys and a girl, and the biggest guy in particular had the long sort of dreadlocks, and the other guy, one guy had a ghetto blaster, that shows my age, with him. And I think he was wearing one of those coloured woolly hats. The girl was quite cute, in fact, but she was wearing a leather jacket. So she appeared to be a little bit of a tough nut. And surprisingly, although not at the time, but looking back on it, after a few minutes, not too many minutes, I found myself deciding to go across the road to the Wimpy restaurant, because I was feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And I went across the road to the Wimpy restaurant, and I'm sure you all remember the Wimpys in those days, and it was a long counter, and you went along and you got your burger and your chip and your drink at the end, and there was a lady at the end on the till. And as I was paying her and talking to her and telling her what drink I wanted, she says, "What part of Northern Ireland are you from?" And I says, "I'm from County Down, from Newry." And she says, "Oh, my son's over there." She says, "He's stationed in Ballykindler, in fact. He's with one of the regiments from the British Army." And she talked we talked on for a few moments, and I sit down. And after sitting down for some seconds, I think it was, maybe it was longer, I heard someone saying, "Hey, Paddy." And I didn't genuinely think it was me they were referring to at that stage, and they called it another couple of times, "Paddy." And I ignored it. Sure, it could have been Paddy. Anybody could have been Paddy Duffy. Anybody. We've lots of Paddys around Newry. And suddenly then, this tall guy, he wasn't quite a punk rocker, but he was quite scary, came over to my table, lifted the salt cellar or something, and said, "Paddy, we were talking to you." And I said, "My name's not Paddy." And he says, "Yes, you're Irish. It must be Paddy." And the manageress at that stage, who'd been at the till, came down and asked them to leave. And that was fine. I then went some time later back to the bus stop, and the guy with the ghetto blaster had left, and the girl and the other fellow was still there. And a few minutes later, the two of the three guys in the cafe came across and started to say, you owe us some money because we didn't get eating our burgers. And at that stage, you can imagine just how scared I was. And would you believe that the tall black guy with the dreadlocks stepped in between me and the two English guys and said, "Hey, buddy, leave my mate alone. Just go off." And they did. And that he turned out to be another fellow student, in fact, at the university, Delbert Wallace from Jamaica, who's still a very good friend of mine. And his girlfriend, who even scared me more, I think, initially because of her leather jacket and her I think she was wearing an earring in her nose. She was the daughter of a judge in London and was in fact very posh and had a very privileged upbringing. And they're obviously lifelong good friends of mine. So I think on that one occasion, you know, there although I didn't say anything to the black people, I certainly thought from a racist point of view. I was racist for a moment, or for a number of, and I experienced racism. Now, I'm not telling that story to get a supporter because it's a great story. It is a great story. And Delbert and I often talk about it. But I'm telling that story because, like the minister probably before today, I did a lot of research about racism in Northern Ireland because I wasn't, beyond that, I have never experienced racism. From that day to this, in my opinion, I personally have never experienced racism, and I've certainly never been a perpetrator of racism. I employ people from 10 different nationalities in my company. 30% of my staff are foreign nationals. I'm an honorary consul for Latvia, and of course my first concern, as with Jerome and all the other honorary consuls, is about the welfare of the citizens who come here from foreign countries. We're all aware of the day-to-day problems that there have been with employment with foreign nationals. You know, half of the problems that I've come across has been by their own people abusing that situation. And I've learned and read, of course, about the bad name that we are getting, as the Minister says, in Northern Ireland, as being a racist society. I'm very much aware of the Romanians and the 150 Romanians that have been, were put out of their homes and had to be housed for a night. I'm aware that, in fact, the recent statistics, Minister, is that in 2009, 2010, there were over 1,000, I think, incidents, racist incidents. Only 16% of them, mind you, ended up in court. But that's a PSNI matter, perhaps. So I'm aware of all that, but I do not believe, and this may upset some people here today, I do not believe that as a people, we in Northern Ireland are innately racist. I don't think we have a history or an innate racism within us. And I think the problem goes beyond that, and we have to start defining really what racism is and where beyond just racism this problem lies. Because I think a lot of the racist issues and racist matters within Northern Ireland come from perhaps a deeper problem within society and an intolerance that maybe has been with us during all the years of the Troubles, and it comes perhaps from a militaristic approach to society and politics that we had for many years. And I think it's a wider issue than just, albeit as a problem. And I think that's what we need to address. Thank you.
As has been said in the past, I think many years ago somebody said to me, "Oh, we're not racist in Northern Ireland, but we're bloody good bigots." Could I now please call on Linda?
Thank you very much, Pamela. I'm here representing the Southern Trust. We're one of, I suppose, 5 6 trusts, if you include the ambulance trust within Northern Ireland, and we've been at the forefront of this modernisation programme. So we've been facing change over the last 3 or 4 years. But we're also facing significant challenges, because not only are we a huge employer, employing in excess of 12,000 staff, we're also a provider of goods and services. And we see every day, our frontline practitioners will see different faces coming through their doors. And within the southern area, we have significant concentrations of migrant workers in our jurisdiction, and where we see that most is in the uptake of our interpreting provision. And to give you context for that, we would draw down routinely about 52% of the share of the interpreting service across the health and personal social services. In the southern area, I suppose we were one of the founder members of the Animate project, that was Action Now to integrate minority access to health. And we found that even though the mass majority of our staff did present with positive attitudes towards migrant workers and change, there was a small minority nonetheless had negative attitudes. So one of the first things that we wanted to do was to try and educate our staff and our practitioners, because we've all heard the myths abounding, and taken on board Connor's comments about the economic climate. It has changed and it will intensify over jobs. But it was to try and educate that in 2002 we had significant skill shortages within health and social care, notably within our nursing sphere. And we actively went out to the Philippines to recruit and address that shortage. And we brought the nurses from the Philippines because they met with the standards that would be set by the Nursing and Midwifery Council. They were skilled up to the right standard that we would want within our service. Not only that, they had competency in the English language skills, so they could talk and relate to patients on the wards. But coming to work in Northern Ireland is quite daunting, and it's daunting for anybody who goes to a different jurisdiction, so it's important to put the right support mechanisms in place to support new staff. And importantly, we put in place a 24/7 help support line for nursing staff, and we did have an incident where some of our staff had actually moved off the hospital complex to live in the local communities, and we responded swiftly to that and managed that in a very effective way. But sadly, there is tensions in the community, and we're aware of that, and I suspect we might face more hostility in the current economic climate. But it's been a positive experience for many of those nurses, because even though they originally came for 2 years, they have continued to live and work in Northern Ireland. And we're also saying, we can say this with authority, it's not just young male migrants that are coming to work in Northern Ireland, they're bringing their families here. And again, that sort of places challenges on health and social care, because we're seeing an increased birth rate to A8, that's Eastern European mothers coming here, and so that would have implications for our children and young persons services. And in responding to that, we saw the need to put in bilingual health visiting assistance to act as a bridge, if you like, for mothers from Eastern European countries to respond to the needs and the cultural sensitivities of mothers that may be different from the Indigenous population. So just in summing up, there's a number of measures, and maybe the questions will draw that out later, but our Minister of Health was very keen to put his full backing behind the Zero Tolerance campaign within health and social care. And you will see, if you come onto our premises, posters that say quite clearly, no room for racism. Training is a big intervention that we put in place for frontline services to try and dispel some of these misunderstandings that do fuel prejudice.
Linda, thank you very much indeed. If I can now call on Jerome, please.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much indeed for the invitation to be here today. I'm here primarily to talk about my own experience of dealing with racism against the Polish community since I became Honorary Consul 2 years ago. The story is not a very pleasant one, but it is one we must face in the modern Northern Ireland that we live in today. Poland represents the largest ethnic minority population, some almost 30,000 in Northern Ireland. And so because of the size of that population, we've had a considerable number of racist attacks again over the past 2 years. In particular, a period of 2 weeks, actually in 2009, there were 90 attacks, mainly around Belfast. And more recently, in August just of this year, 30 attacks took place again in South Belfast. One particular case I had to deal with was this year in North Belfast, when a family where the home was attacked 3 times in the 1 week, and slogans were daubed on the wall and the windows were broken. And it was a very, very traumatic experience for that family, who came here and came here only to do one thing, and that was to work and earn a living for themselves and for their family. The latest figures that I have from the 1st of April to the 22nd of October 2010 is that there were 446 incidents and 299 crimes for the whole of Northern Ireland. On top of that table is South, East and North Belfast, and in the rural areas, Craigavon, Foyle and jointly Ballymena and Newry and Mourne. Since 2004, when Northern Ireland became a destination for the new 8 accession countries of the European Union, a very mixed picture has emerged, from one of welcome to outright hostility. A typical reaction is they have come to take our jobs, are living on our social welfare system and so on. No sooner had we left the troubles of the past 35 years behind, we quickly found a new community to attack. Racism and sectarianism are, to me, on the same side of the one coin. The mentality and the mindset of people who engage is exactly the same. So the challenge for us as we debate this issue today is to understand what are the factors that lie at the heart of the issue. What drives people from, let me say, all sections of the community to engage in the despicable behaviour, and what we can do to address and hopefully solve, because solve we must. I don't have the answers, but let me for a moment pose some thoughts. Racism refers to race, and sectarian refers to a sect, a body of a religious group, and bigotry means intolerance of any other position. Racism takes many forms. You have the overt and sinister, in-your-face racism of the likes of the Ulster British People's Party, which is associated with the BNP, who issued a leaflet, in fact, before the last election, targeting specifically the Polish community for attack. They're taking our jobs, forcing our wages down, and burdening our health services. And they also made the charge in the same leaflet that the PSNI were receiving hundreds of recruits and were denying the Protestant population of those jobs within the PSNI. They were the things that were in that particular leaflet. You then have the hidden racism, as I have experienced, of employers and people within the workplace who have made life a misery for many migrant workers, working long hours, low wages, and enduring verbal abuse. It seems as a general rule that all these factors are based on fear, that our space will be invaded, and that we are under threat, and so on. It is obvious that this must all come from a common depth in the mind that has afflicted the human race since the very beginning. The great failure has been our collective inability to handle this factor as we look down history of wars, conflicts, and religious and persecution, genocide, dispersal, and so on. And this remains as powerful and divisive as today as at any time. Hence, the reason why we are having the launch of this Racism Wrong campaign today. I congratulate Challenge of Change, and indeed other campaigns such as the Unite Against Hate campaign, for the work that they are doing, and which is so necessary. But we will not confront it by merely highlighting it. A major challenge needs to be presented, and as I see it, this challenge is in 3 parts. The first is to the psychologists and other professionals to properly identify the nature of racism and its related afflictions, sectarianism and bigotry. The second is in education in the schools and in broadcasting. And the third is in government through legislation. But we can't properly educate or legislate unless we fully understand. While we have many theories and positions on this huge subject, I strongly feel we need clarification and we need action. We can no longer hide behind the rituals of condemnation or excuses as the problem raises its head again here in Northern Ireland with the new immigrant community. We have a duty to present the nature of the challenge as we see it and take a lead, because all the talk in the world will get us nowhere without action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. If I could call now on Thomas, please.
Okay, thanks very much. I had always intended to be here, but up until Friday I was going to be sitting where you're sitting, and then found I was on the panel. But I am delighted to be here in any event. I suppose I have been involved, along with my colleagues in the Council and councillors in Newry and Mourne, in peace building and community relations and good relations work for well now in excess of 20 years. And hopefully I can give you some sort of a perspective from a local authority point of view, I suppose closer to the cold face, as it were. During that time we have worked with people like Dr. Derek Wilson and Dr. Duncan Morrow, then from Futureways in the University of Ulster. We worked with them and a group called Counteract on what, looking back, but not then, was a groundbreaking programme which was described then as READY, Relationships in Equity, Diversity and Interdependence. Now those are words that are quite commonly used now in the field of good relations and racism, but back then there were different words. There were words that we weren't just as familiar with as we would be today. We also worked very closely with Brendan McAllister, a native of Newry and now one of Northern Ireland's Victims Commissioners, on the establishment of community fora. Again, some of the first of that type of work in Northern Ireland, and indeed the Minister and Jerome and others would have been involved in those very early days with us in that work. In those early days, the work really was focused on what we then called, and still do, the two communities in Northern Ireland. But over the years that has changed considerably as more and more people have come from various parts of the world and began to choose Newry and Mourne as their destination of choice to come to work, to come, and thankfully in many cases to come to stay and to live and to set up their families in this district. Now we over that 20-25 years have attempted to put community and good relations at the core of what we do as a local authority. And daily within the Council we have staff who work on equality issues, who work on community and good relations issues, who work on our anti-racism strategy, and people who work to support minority ethnic groups and individuals. And we try to have an integrated approach because I think that's sometimes what's missing. Different people are doing very good work in different places, but it does need to be joined up. And we try to join that sort of work with work that we would do on community safety and indeed on health and well-being. It is a fact that Newry and Mourne is now one of the most diverse districts in Northern Ireland, and as Jerome has said, post-2004 a large number of people from Central and Eastern European countries decided to come and settle in this district. And the Council's response to the needs of minority ethnic residents was, I suppose, multifaceted and wide-ranging, but one of the responses that we had back then was to petition hard to have Peace Tree funding made available for what now is the Challenge of Change programme and Ethnic Minority Support Centre. And it wasn't easy, because at the start this was different for the Peace programme and our early applications failed, but eventually people saw what we were trying to do along with our colleagues in Louth, and the funding came for that first phase of Challenge of Change under Peace 2. We have, for anyone who isn't aware, here in Newry, we have an Ethnic Minority Support Centre based in Newry Town Hall. Now that was opened in 2007, and so far as I'm led to believe, it's the only council-run support centre for minority ethnic residents in Northern Ireland, and it attempts to provide direct support on a range of issues: employment issues, access to services, welfare rights, and so on. And it is a case, and Dr. O'Hare mentioned the fact that sometimes we don't see racism and we don't see problems around us. But since January of this year, approximately 1,300 people have had need to visit that centre and to seek advice from the professionals that we have working there that can assist them. Most of those people would have come from Poland or Lithuania, but there are still also large numbers of Latvians, Slovakians, Czechs, and indeed people from other parts of the world. And I know Jim Bagnall is somewhere in the audience. We work in close relationship with the housing executive to provide a housing clinic within that centre and with the Citizens Advice Bureau to assist in employment rights under the Challenge of Change programme. And indeed, I don't think it's insignificant that from this area that we happen to have two honorary consuls who represent people from different parts of the world. Indeed, Jerome's base and his office is in Newry Town Hall. The Challenge of Change Peace 2 programme, we were delighted, got some recognition for the work that the people had been engaged in, to the extent that it won a Northern Ireland Award in 2008 for the best partnership working, and we were pleased that it came runner-up in the UK for that type of working as well. So we took that as a yardstick or a measurement that at least, whilst we hadn't done everything, we were moving in the right direction. Newry and Mourne District Council currently are the lead partner under the Peace 3 programme, and during a part of the Peace 3 programme we have moved further and wider in relation to our Challenge of Change, and recognised that that work had to be taken outside of Newry and Mourne and Louth and into the areas of Armagh, Banbridge, Craigavon and Monaghan. The Challenge of Change is one of 7 strategic priorities under the Peace 3 partnership, and this priority is one of the 7 is delivered by Newry and Mourne District Council. Examples of Challenge of Change and anti-racism work that is done: we attempt to target anti-racism against young people and communities affected by racism. We have anti-racism training programmes. We get independent reporting schemes for racist incidents. And indeed, today is a visible manifestation of that work in that the Racism is Wrong campaign is being launched today as part of that programme.
Thomas, thank you very much indeed. And Kevin.
Thank you very much, Pamela. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. As my little track there says at the front, I'm a lecturer in social studies in Dundalk Institute of Technology. So I'm not representing Dundalk Institute of Technology here. I'm representing Louth and Meath Partnership. I was asked to say something about what has been my experience of racism and how have I tried to address or combat it. Well, my experience of it relates something to what Jeremy said. I grew up in England during the 1960s and 70s of Irish immigrant parents, at a time when being Irish was a bit of a joke, literally. In England, the term Irish was synonymous with stupidity. Collins' Dictionary of English, for example, I'll give you, it says one of the definitions of Irish that it gives, as late as 1993, is ludicrous or illogical. Now, the pervasive stereotype of the thick Irish had a profound impact on me. The people I knew, you know, my family, my relations, my teachers at school, fellow students, they were very diverse people, you know, full of individual diversity, individual humanity. They didn't fit this reductive stereotype that was pervasive in the wider society about the Irish. So I thought to myself, you know, this doesn't fit me. This stereotype doesn't fit my family, it doesn't fit people I know. So how do I know that other stereotypes don't fit other groups? And there were other immigrant groups at the time, the children of West Indian and Asian immigrants. Now, because of the significance of skin colour in English society at the time, they couldn't escape, they couldn't hide. They bore, if you like, the marker of their difference. Whereas for many of my peers, because we were white, many of my peers denied their Irish identity. They abandoned their identity, abandoned their ethnic background, they became English. They assimilated. And this is a tragedy. And it's a tragedy born out, really, of the pervasive, stereotypical attitudes to the Irish that were prevalent in England at the time. Now, things have changed to some extent in England, at least. You know, being Irish, for example, is no longer synonymous with stupidity. Although, you know, when you read some of the London-based commentary about our current economic difficulties, you can detect, it's not hard to detect a residue of that stereotype. So that, growing up with that kind of stereotype, as I say, it shaped my subsequent academic studies. And if I turn out to talk about what I try to do to combat this type of pervasive, what I call banal racism, we've heard some incidences of hot racism, which are the incidents of violence, overt discrimination. But there's another kind of racism, which is what I think the Minister referred to when he referred to Stephen Lawrence. The Stephen Lawrence report identified institutional racism. This is pervasive. This is unwitting racism. And for me, the foundation of this is the usage of unthinking stereotypes. So one of the things that I've done in my life, in particular at the moment, I've developed a course called Ethnic Studies, which I deliver in Dundalk Institute of Technology to challenge the pervasive ethnic stereotypes that exist in our society. Thank you.
Kevin, thank you very much indeed. In fact, thank you very much indeed to all our panel members. As you can appreciate, we have got a wide section of our community from all walks of life, all coming together under the one common cause: racism is wrong. Thank you very much indeed to those of you who have been putting your questions on postcards. So the first question I have is Ken Fraser.
In your view, what is the relationship between racism and sectarianism?
Jerome, to you first.
Ken, as I said in my comments, I see those two things as on the same side of the one kind. I think the mentality that is in the mind of that particular person who is engaged in that activity is exactly the same. They are people who are obviously lack confidence, I think, in themselves. They're inadequate in certain ways, and they feel in some way under threat in terms of perhaps maybe their own way of life, their own position in life or whatever. And so I think the mentality to me within, in relation to sectarianism on the one hand and racism on the other is exactly the same. That's how I see it.
Would any other member of the panel like to add? Yes, Kevin?
Just like, it's a good question. I think that one of the things you could say perhaps about sectarianism is you could convert. You can't escape. It's much harder to escape your racial labelling. You know, I'm not saying that racism is something that's biologically real, but it's much harder to escape racism. There is a sense that, you know, sectarianism, you could abandon religion, you could abandon, you know, you could change.
I think by the same token, the approach to finding solutions to both are the same in terms of what Kevin said about stereotypical approaches to and education. So I think that that's the important part, is finding a way to eradicate both racism and sectarianism is the same approach.
So I think then what we are saying is that racism isn't necessarily innate in us. We're not born with racism. It's the same problem as other structural issues within society. I think one example, paradoxical example of racism and sectarianism coming from the same home, I often describe Kilkeel as the most sectarian place in the world, and I'm allowed to do that because I'm a landowner in Kilkeel and therefore more or less from that area. And I recently went to visit it, to visit the community group down there, and I was ringing back to my Kilkeel PA and said, Ashley, I'm right at the end of Newry Street, where do I go to now? And she says, where exactly are you? And I said, well, I've got a Crossroads and there are a lot of red, white and blue flags in front of me. And she says, oh yes. She said, we put those up to welcome you. And I said, well, why did you put Red Hand of Ulster and the Union Jack, and why is there an American flag in the middle of it? She says, what? I says, why do you have the stars and stripes of the American flag in the middle of all of these other flags? And she says, is it red, white and blue? And I says, yeah. She says, oh, that's why. So I think there you've got racism, or different nationalities being distorted. I suggested that perhaps next year the young Ballinran band might be coming in with French flags draped around them, and they'll have onions on their around their necks and sashes. So there is a very close, there's a very close blur. There's a blurred area there, I think, between what instigates sectarianism, racism, or other intolerances in society. And I think that's where I come from.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I would go even further than that, and I would say that racism is the new sectarianism, and whereas it has become unacceptable to express sectarian views in public, it is acceptable to express racist views in public, and this is something we have to challenge. So people who hold either sectarian or racist views, now they have an excuse and they have a bit of an approval to voice these views as opposed to voicing sectarian views. That's my opinion.
I think I know I would agree with that, because they're both wrong and have many similarities at their core, but it's almost got to be a position that people who would have behaved in a sectarian manner against each other are almost joined together, and it seems to be right to act together in a racist way, and that's a worrying trend.
Mm-hmm. The question, was this the question with no name about the employers, is that?
Holiday Month campaign, thank you. And one of the things we try and do is encourage employers to participate in that by challenging racism within the workplace. And I just want to know what the panel think in relation to what role employers can or should play in challenging racism.
Employers, Linda, perhaps you would like to take that?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we're actively involved in is with business in the community, and looking again at the new migrant worker charter. We met just recently last week to look at the key tenets of that, and to get that message across to our staff as well, that we do value migrant workers and the contribution that they bring to the workplace. And I know there are issues still prevail around recognition of overseas qualifications, but that's something that needs to be influenced further up the line with the likes of Dell. But I suppose one of the things I alluded in my introduction about the small minority of staff that might still have those types of negative attitudes, I'm trying to put it very eloquently, but I mean, it's there and it's something that we need to challenge. And I think education is very important and it's a key to all of this. I'm very encouraged that my own son, who's only 17, who's at school at the moment, and they've introduced into the curriculum learning for life and work. And a key element of that is all about diversity and respecting difference and embracing it at the same time and valuing it. So within the workplace we have various policies in place, but they're backed up by training interventions. And again, it's challenging these attitudes that are often founded in incorrect facts. I mean, we've heard much about migrant workers coming and taking jobs, and I can only speak for the health sector. I mean, they didn't come to displace workers, they came to fill very necessary skills gaps. Now, I know the landscape has changed so much in terms of the economic climate, but within health and social care, we've employed overseas workers for years. And I know when you go in to maybe be placed in the theatre, you know, it's rather to do with the competence of who's performing the operation rather than the colour or their accent and so forth. So I think education is key, and having the requisite policies in place, like working well together, which is about just forming good relations in the workplace, and then having policies like harassment policies that do challenge those incidents that do occur and when you do need to intervene as an employer.
Kasia, I'm sure from the union point of view you would wholeheartedly agree that it's education.
Well, that's true, but I want to add some more on that. It's fair to say that, okay, as a public sector employer, you've got all these policies and all that. And private sector employers obviously had an obligation under the legislation to promote equality of opportunity and not to discriminate and things like that. But I have to tell you, many times I went to an employer and I see in the reception equal opportunity statement and all that. And we are there to represent a migrant worker who has been either mistreated, discriminated, racially abused and things like that. So it's not enough to have a policy endorsed or written on the paper. And we can have many codes of practice, and I appreciate the work that the business in the community is doing, because that's good work. But it's not enough. We have to be more active in promoting equality of opportunity, promoting equality. One of the things that the unions are doing, we are promoting union learning within the workplace. Unfortunately, ESOL, English language, is not one of the essential skills in Northern Ireland, so that's a problem. But from our point of view, we would encourage employers to be more active, more proactive, and integrating and involving migrant workers in all aspects of the workplace. So starting from English classes, why not have a half an hour during lunch? That's a start. Why do employers put migrant workers with the same language and the same production nights? They have never get the chance to learn any English. Not that they need it for many of the jobs, I know, but learning English would help them integrate and participate in this society more. So there's loads of that could be done by the employers. Unfortunately, because they don't have to do it, obviously they won't do it, and because their main priority is obviously making profit, the training and upskilling of the workforce is unfortunately in many cases not on the list.
Before, I think someone should defend employers at this stage, and it's probably my role to do that as a private sector employer. I mean, I don't think it's all bad in terms of employment of foreign nationals. Of course, there have been issues, and I would be the first to understand that, and I've had to deal with some. But in Northern Ireland, we've had employers who've been used to fair employment legislation from right back, I think, from the late 70s, certainly early 80s. And I think most responsible employers are responsible about their employees in terms of the employment that they offer. Now, there's been some abuse, there's no doubt about that, of the taking advantage of foreign nationals on cheaper labour. But for the main part, most employers that I talk to, and I talk to many of them, have always been very positive about the work ethos and about the ability of many foreign nationals who have come here to Northern Ireland to work in their places of employment. We still have a problem with getting some of their professional qualifications recognised. But where employers have been able to employ these foreign nationals at the level that they are trained to work at, then you find that they are certainly a very proactive workforce and people who are very intelligent and have a lot to offer in their diversity. And it's a richness that we'll always find in a workplace where there is a diverse workforce. So I think it's not all negative, and it could be very easy that we go out here today saying, "Oh, people, all employers are abusing foreign nationals." But the bottom line is we're not all abusing foreign nationals, and some of them have fitted in very well. But there is some work to be done. I wouldn't deny that.
And you're obviously talking to other employers as well.
Yes.
Facing similar problems.
Facing similar problems.
Could I come in? I do agree with you that probably the vast majority of employers are excellent employers and are employing people properly and paying them properly as far as employment law is concerned. But it seems as if when foreign nationals have come to work here, some employers feel that they can get away with things in relation to immigrant employees that they would never consider trying with the local population. I've had cases of people, well, I know for a fact in this particular town there is one employer is paying £2 below the minimum wage, and that is illegal. That's one particular. Another case that I've had over the past couple of years is an employer who required their workers, and these were contract employers, and I have a big issue in relation to contract employers, people who are being contracted by an outside agency and pushed into various employers, required to sit in the canteen waiting for work to come in. That is absolutely appalling. And those are some of the particular things that I would have encountered and tried to deal with. And the trouble is that I sometimes can't deal with them because they are so frightened Even people working at £4 an hour, they don't want to lose their job. Because if they lose their job, the likelihood is that they will not have fulfilled the 12 months registration scheme under the Home Office. I think that there is particular sectors within the workplace that is particularly bad.
Can I just make a comment? I disagree with Jerome on that this is a minority of employers, because we came across loads of employers across public sector, private sector, big employers, small employers who are abusing and mistreating migrant workers. And I would like to add just one more thing. If we appreciate migrant workers so much, and if we appreciate their work ethics, and that employers say migrant workers work hard and all that, why is it that the majority of migrant workers, 60% or 60 or 70% of migrant workers work just for minimum wage, national minimum wage, and 90% work for below £6? So does it show our appreciation of their work ethics, qualifications? Does it? Because I'm not sure it does.
Thomas, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think, I don't know what the percentage is, but I think the real problem is that we don't know what the percentage is. There's a danger that sometimes, and I suppose maybe more so in the public sector than the private sector, that we assume just because we have policies that's enough, that's the job done. That's the job really, I suppose, only started. There is a role for employers, but it has to be taken seriously from the top of an organisation to the bottom of it, from the right to the left of it, right the whole way through it. And I think as employers we mustn't be afraid to challenge what we do and how we do it. And what we shouldn't do is to be presumptuous enough to know that we know what the needs of ethnic minorities are. We need to find out what those needs are and then address them. And the only example that I can give is that years ago, whenever we had policies about political or religious discrimination, it wasn't until we were prepared to really open up the Pandora's box and to see what was in it. And I've got to say, with a lot of respect to the councillors in Newry and Mourne, not to be afraid of what came out of it, because after we put in those and started to address it properly, we actually got more complaints than we ever had before. But there was nothing wrong with that. What was really wrong was not knowing they were there in the first place.
Yeah. I'm just going back to, we're talking about statistics. We know that in the 1 year up to March 2010, 438 applications on race grounds, and that almost half were in employment issues. So there's figures to show that that's just in a year. So you're talking 200 and something on employment issues. And that, again, is those who are coming forward. And there's a lot of people who don't know that they can come forward to us. So it's big.
But there are 80,000 businesses in Northern Ireland, so to suggest that it's not the minority of businesses and employers suggests that it's the majority, and I just don't think that's true. I think there is abuse, particularly in the sectors where they're being contracted into, but I don't think it's true to suggest that the majority of responsible employers in Northern Ireland are abusing ethnic minorities or foreign nationals. I think a more fundamental structural problem is the survey that was carried out by the University of Ulster between, I think twice on two occasions, 2007 and 2005 perhaps, where it demonstrated that up to 39% of the population in Northern Ireland who were interviewed, and I think it was quite a wide interview of 1,200, 1,500 people, suggested that they would not want to have a foreign national in their workforce, in their place of employment. 39% of ordinary people, said they didn't want to work with a Chinese person or an Asian or an African. I think that's more fundamental, perhaps.
Could I just briefly, I mean, whether it's a majority or a minority, whatever wherever the line falls, if you like, it's unacceptable wherever it happens, to whatever extent. And while there is fair employment legislation, I suppose the difference is that people who have lived here, and particularly people who have lived here through discrimination, understand their rights under fair employment legislation. The people that perhaps Jerome was speaking about have language issues, are vulnerable because they're very much in need of work. They've come here under poor economic circumstances, and therefore are more vulnerable to exploitation. They don't know their rights, and that's the sort of people that we get coming through our door that aren't sure of their rights. So I do think that very strong rights-based legislation is the way forward in dealing with all exploitation, and that roots it out. And I think also a high-profile pursuit of those who have been exploiting workers and examples made of people in courts, I think, is the way to deal with it.
Well, that sort of follows on the question who's just, it's been handed up to me here from, is it Dennis or Denise? I can't quite read the writing. Cranston. Ah, yes, I think, yes.
Yes, I think that on a very positive note, there are some very good employers, and I think it's important even, that we kind of showcase those employers and learn from them. But my question to the panel is, where there are poor employers or employers who, have very bad practice in terms of their treatment of minority ethnic staff and migrant workers, should we be naming and shaming those employers?
Jerome, I think we'll pass that to you. Should we be naming and shaming the employers? Because we're not asking you to do it right at this precise moment.
No, I don't think I would agree that we should do that. I think that would be very damaging, for a whole variety of reasons. It would damage, those that are employed within that particular company, and even the local population as well. I think it wouldn't be the right way to go about handling this sort of issue.
But, Minister, you were saying through legislation, then that's when you can then name and shame.
Well, I mean, naming and shaming is fine. It goes to a certain extent, and I would have no difficulty if people are exploiting workers that they are named and shamed. To be quite honest with you, I would disagree with Jerome on that point. But I think it would be more appropriate that if people are breaking the law and exploiting workers, then they should be prosecuted under the law. And I think that's the way to actually, if there is no consequence for people carrying out that type of exploitation. And it seems that what we are relying on is the decency of employers in a lot of cases, and I'm sure there are a large number of decent employers, but there are also some who aren't. And I think that if they are paying below the minimum wage, then they're breaking laws, and they should be prosecuted under those laws.
Conor, could I just quickly come in? I certainly agree with what Conor has just said there about in fact, prosecution. That certainly should take place. There's no doubt at all about that. But just name and shame basically without evidence, basically, would be the wrong thing to do. But they should be in fact challenged. They should be brought to the industrial tribunal courts, and I've always supported that. So that is a very, very necessary thing to do. And legislation is there to actually do that.
But Jerome, I think this is something you also touched on. It's Myra has asked, what assurances can you give to the victims that future incidents will not happen, or is there a strong protection of the victim's safety if incidents have been reported?
Well, can I go on that?
Please do, yes.
We were talking about, prosecuting employers and all that. I'm not sure how it is happening, because it is not happening. It takes an individual, a brave individual, to take a case to the industrial tribunal. The way the industrial tribunals operate is also they are not entitled to legal aid. So then they have to pay for a solicitor without knowing what the outcome of their case would be. And then very often the cases are settled outside of the tribunal. So there is no naming or shaming. There is no help for other employees who have maybe been abused in the same workplace but were too afraid to come forward. So our system doesn't support victims at all.
But there are many good groups out there, and certainly since I became honorary consul for Latvia, I've been visiting many of them who are working often on a voluntary basis. Citizens advice bureaus, for example, every office right now in Ireland are on a daily basis dealing with issues of migrant workers and foreign nationals. And there are many other good groups. I've just recently met with Bernadette Devlin over in Dungannon, or McAlliskey she's called now, and she's doing some great work over there with her group. And in Bangor, for example, the First Presbyterian Church there every week have a class for English on a voluntary basis, and they have something like 100 people turn up, 100 foreign nationals turn up to learn English. And part of the problem is that these foreign nationals are brought here under contract or by many of their own nationals. And they don't have the language, and they don't even have the ability, therefore, to find out their rights. And I think somehow or other, we've got to get some mechanism where, upon entry into the country, that they're given their rights, that they're met, that there's some form of guidance given to them, and that these people aren't left isolated, as we're finding many of them are, isolated hiding almost in the shadows, or not wanting to come forward and therefore that's hard to use, not only in employment but also in terms of accommodation, for example. The big issue of abuse.
How to bring it, can it work on a take too? Is it how to put away, does it?
No,
put it in there?
Yeah, if I
There
can
are
just
many issues, and I think it's a structural issue that needs to be addressed. When people come into the country, there's some registration, some form.
Jane, you wanted to pick up?
I just want to say on naming and shaming, the press is very valuable in this area because when a case is won in court, it goes to the press, and that's a way that employers can be named and shamed through the press. But one point I wanted to make on monitoring, we at the moment are lobbying to have ethnic minorities included in the fair employment monitoring. Now, so when it comes out, we've already got gender there, so you can see what's the split in the workforce and gender. It'd be very, very useful to have a similar type of monitoring so that you know exactly the makeup of the workforce. And we're really pressing government to try and get that included, and I think that'd be an important step starting on the road you're talking about.
Joe Blair has a question, I think, along the lines. Yes.
What is the current trend in demographic shift of migrant workers within the province?
I think you initially wanted Linda to take that one?
Yes, that's right.
Well, that's a very difficult question because there's no single source that we can refer to that actually gives us precise numbers. I mean, the types of information we would draw down from would be the issue of national insurance numbers, registrations with general practitioners, the workers' registration scheme, applications made to that particular provision, the school census. The situation is fluent, and I know there's been much talk about this mass exodus of migrants leaving Northern Ireland. That's not the experience that we have found, and certainly not through the networks that we have within our southern jurisdiction. You referred to STEP earlier. We have the Craigavon Intercultural Programme, Stephen Smith, and they would be a voice for migrants within the Craigavon area. But what we're seeing, and what's more of a challenge, I'm not seeing a downturn even in our statistics through the Regional Interpreting Service. They remain constantly high. But what we're challenged with is the new migrant workers that are coming into our jurisdiction. In our area, it would be mostly Polish, Portuguese and Lithuanian, but we're seeing increasingly more Latvians coming through and more of the Roma community. So there's no single source, and I suppose the only safe answer is there's several thousands. And even if you listen to Stephen Nolan's show, you would hear maybe 200,000. So there's never one single definite source, and it is transient.
Joanne Sweeney's got a question for the Minister, I think, along that basis.
It's been a couple of weeks now since we've all have sort of been told what is likely to happen with this, with the spending review. Just would like to ask, how do you believe that how the local government and other services impact on local minority communities?
Well, I think it could potentially have a very severe impact, and it very much depends on our own response to that. I know the UP have launched some proposals this morning. We have launched proposals of how to both find savings within government spend, but also revenue raising options as well. And I noticed the DUP have as well. So I think we've been saying this for some time, there's a very real need for the parties here to engage very seriously at looking how we offset what is a very harsh cut in the resources available to us. Not just in terms of services, and that is important, and there is, I think from the last executive discussion I was at, there is a genuine commitment across all of the parties there to try and protect services, to protect the services, particularly the most vulnerable, which would include migrant workers, people who are most on the margins of society. But there's also the impact, I think, in terms of the capital budget and the effect that will have on employment. We are already seeing rising unemployment. We're seeing economic pressures, and we do know that it's a fact. It has happened in many, many countries that more economic stress that society is under, the more likelihood that racism raises its ugly head to an even greater extent. So I think that we do want to try and ensure that we protect our budgets as best we can. We won't accept what has been coming over from Westminster, and I don't doubt that governments have to tackle deficits, but I think there's more than just simply tackling deficits and what George Osborne was proposing. I think it's about ideology as well. It's about cutting back the state from a Tory point of view. So I think we have to challenge that, but we also have to put our heads together and ensure that whatever the intended effects there are from the coalition government in Britain, that they're not felt here in that regard. And it's not simply just about protecting services, it's also about protecting employment. And in that regard, I think the capital budget that we have is hugely important.
Well, I think everybody on the panel from public and private sector is anxious about the cuts as well. Jane, you wanted to add something in there?
I wanted to say yes and agree with the Minister totally, because often in times like this, protection for the most vulnerable is needed. And we've got our law, we've got our police, we've got our crime laws, etc., which must swing into operation even tighter in times like this. Thank you.
Well, I think also that there's no doubt there's going to be cuts. It's the politician's first job is to go and fight the case for Northern Ireland and reduce those cuts if you can possibly do that. And it's nice to hear, Sinn Féin talking about their $1 billion cuts and DUP talking about their $1 billion cuts. I think what we really need in Northern Ireland is an immediate and cohesive and unified approach from the executive and from all the parties on this to ensure what we would have to do in the private sector and in business, which is just good management of the resources that are going to be available to us. And I think a lot of these cuts can be found through good management and perhaps greater efficiencies. But it's very, very important that those who are most vulnerable in our society are first to be protected. I think everyone would agree with that.
Linda?
I think we're blessed in Northern Ireland that we have the Section 75 equality duties. We're well advanced in terms of the Western Hemisphere, in terms of the tools that we have. And I was very encouraged recently to pick up in one of the Migrant Support Network's bulletins that NICFA are gearing up to scale up the voluntary community sector to use Section 75 as a tool in these very tough discussions around budget cuts. But earlier this year, again, gearing up for new equality schemes, and they're very different from what went before in that they will have an action-based plan to hold authorities to account. And those action-based plans have to be premised on inequality audits. And we would know as a provider of services where those inequalities are. We're equipped to know that, having done a very in-depth evidence-based analysis over the last 3 months and for years before that where the inequalities are. So those plans should be actually asking us to set out clear measures within that to tackle inequalities. And the Commission were very astute and very much to the fore earlier this year when we relaunched our guidance for our board members. That's our non-exec and directors and chief executives, to restate what those obligations are, to point out the fact it is in this economic climate that those groups that are marginalised run a real risk of becoming more marginalised. And equality needs to be mainstreamed into the decision-making processes. It's not an add-on. So you should be thinking at the point when you're making decisions about cuts in service, who's going to be directly affected and who's going to be adversely affected as a result of these decisions. And you've got to evidence-base that more clearly now. And we'll be held to account through the new arrangements in terms of promoting the outcomes of our screenings. They're going to have to be made publicly available, and groups can challenge us back through that process if they have the evidence to do so.
Well, we are fast running out of time. We've got a lot of questions still to get through. Can I just get to, I think we might just only have time for possibly one more question about Seamus McCrory's question.
My question would be around us as individuals in our communities, and say that we have a huge role as individuals. And would ask the panel, what types of things can we be doing in our day-to-day lives and at home with our families and our children that can possibly be part of the solution?
Well, I mean, I think you obviously, certainly in terms of your own children, you lead by example and you ensure that racism is, because sometimes you can get jokes or attitudes that come out of school life, which I think you have to be very quick to correct and ensure that even as supposed humour doesn't take hold. But I do think there are a lot of organisations, I think you're correct, there is a lot of positivity going on, and one organisation I suppose I'm more familiar with is the GAA, and under the Ulster Council they have been very proactive in trying to involve foreign nationals in Gaelic sports. And I think it's a great way through all sports for people to assimilate, to become part of a community and become valued members of a community, and to get an opportunity to play a role in community life. And as I say, I know particularly in relation to the GAA, because it's very much at the core of community life in rural parts here, that is. I noticed. Sometime, I think it was last year, I was following a report of St Joseph's Cross McLean had won a match, and the full forward had scored about 3 goals and 5 points, and I couldn't pronounce his name, but I think he was a Lithuanian or a Latvian guy, and he had been the star player for the team. And I think that those things, I think, are very, very positive. And that means that in youngsters playing sports, that becomes natural. I think it's very, very beneficial to us as a society and as a race of people that we have an influx of people from other lands as well. I think it benefits us greatly culturally and in a whole range of, economically, obviously, a whole range of ways. But I do think in our everyday lives we just have to be vigilant to make sure that we don't tolerate at all any creeping form of racism. And I think there are very, very many good organisations out there, particularly sporting organisations, that are doing very good work at breaking down those barriers and involving people from other nationalities in their games.
Just before, Jane, I know you want to come in. Kevin, can I just ask you, because obviously you're teaching the youngsters, do you find that the youngsters are then going home and teaching the parents? Because, I mean, it is a cliche to say they are our future and they are our future employers.
Well, I think that the thing that Conor spoke about, the GAA, most of the students I would work with are involved in the GAA. And there's a lot of good positive stuff going on there. But the point about individuals, for me, I mean, it's kind of nebulous, but it's a bigger picture thing. Like, what is your ethnic narrative? Who belongs here? Who owns this space? You know, I mean, I was brought up, like many of us, with an idea that there was a pure race of people here since time immemorial, with an Irish Adam and Eve that's never been unsullied or impacted upon by anybody other than colonisers and people who shouldn't be here. And I know students who would still regard Northern Irish Protestants as settlers. If they regard Northern Irish Protestants as settlers, what chance are the Poles and the Nigerians and recent immigrants going to have? So it's for me, it's the narratives in the family, in the home. What is our space? Who belongs in our place? And rethinking Ireland as a kind of as a site of settlement, rather than a place that's owned by one particular group and is, if you like, still resisting the arrival of people who came here 300 or 400 years ago. So it's rethinking those ethnic narratives, I think, is what individuals can do in their families and as educators can do.
Jane?
There's so much. I mean, I know when I was young, I think what got me thinking this way was I had an absolute fascination with everything foreign. I wanted to drink in foreign people. I had to go down to Dublin to see Spanish and French coming in because they weren't coming into Belfast at the time. And I just knew that there was so much to learn from that which is foreign. And it's not about and I always saw foreign as a compliment rather than an insult. And I think the attitude change that can get people thinking that way. And meeting someone foreign on the street and saying, you know, great, welcome, it's great you're here, and where are you from, and tell us about your country. And that's another thing I think we can learn an awful lot about, is learning about their country. I know there's a school in Belfast had a Polish day, and I know Jerome was at it. And, you know, schools doing that sort of thing, teachers coming in and saying, you know, let's have Lithuanian food today, or, you know, or religious churches coming in and bringing other religions. There's so much could be done. There's a wealth to learn out there.
Jared, you're going to be handing out onions and French flags?
Well, you know what? I danced last year with 2,000 tribesmen and women in the northwest corner of Nigeria. I had to travel 8 hours by road, 2 hours in a dugout canoe, and another 4 hours over hills and rocks in a pickup truck to get there. And they were there to wait for me, 2,000 of them. And they were in tribes of up to 80 and 90 people. I mean, this is out of biblical times. I'm telling you, this is 2,000 years back. And for the first time in my life, I enjoyed dance. I mean, I loved every part of the Irish culture. I speak the language, I play the music, I've done everything, but the one part I hated was dance. And last year, as I danced for 3 hours with these people, I suddenly learned to enjoy dance. The richness that is diversity can only be experienced when you embrace, you know, these people. And like Jane, that's always been my approach to it too. Other than one slip and nothing.
I just wish we had that video.
I think Rowan has it.
Oh, excellent. This side of the table, what as individuals do you think we could do? This would just be the final message for today. Thomas, what as an individual do you think we should be asking people to do? Or as individuals, what should we be doing?
Okay. Well, I suppose it's the old thing, actions speak louder than words, louder than legislation, louder than policies. You're a champion for what we're about here today, and I think each and every one of us have to be, in our own way, champions. Now, we might only do small things, and individually those are small things, but if they're all joined up, then they become a tidal wave of, if you like, for good. So I suppose we can't sit back. This is for each and every one.
Linda?
So this is back to the old cliche, but it's, treat others as you would like to be treated yourself, and I think that's a simple premise, and if we could get that right and act on that, I think it would go a long way.
Kasia?
I think it is extremely important that in these challenging times that could possibly lie ahead, that depends on what our politicians do about the cuts. But in these potentially very challenging times that lie ahead of us, that we not forget who we are, and that we don't start turning against our workmates, our neighbours, our friends, that we don't start suddenly saying, oh, times are bad here, go back home, you've got a place to go back to. So I think it's extremely important to remember that that migration is, a modern phenomena, and it's part of the global economy and a part of our lives now. So we should remember not to turn nasty in those nasty times. So hopefully that's my message here.
And Jerome?
Pamela, I think one of the greatest things that did happen to our country in 2004 was the influx of immigrants that came to our country, and because it has enriched us, it opened us up. I think we were a very closed society before the new populations came. So I think that is wonderful. I think that we should obviously educate our children properly, bring them up with the right attitudes towards the immigrant communities that are living here. And I prefer to use the word immigrant communities rather than migrant communities. Actually, we hear the word migrant all the time. They are immigrants and they're living here permanently, most of them. And I think we should make the effort to actually befriend them, invite them to our homes, get to know them, get to understand their country and where they've come from. They've come here basically under enormous pressure. Basically, they've travelled from, in my case, Poland, and in other countries, they have had to cope not just with the culture, but also with the language. Many of them don't speak English, and this is obviously very sad for those that can't communicate in the English language. So you can imagine how difficult it can be for those particular families who are living here. So I think make friends with them, welcome them, and treat them properly. I think that is the word. Treat them properly and treat them respectfully and treat them as you would want to be treated yourself. Because let's say, we are a nation of immigrants. We went to all over the world. We were a population one time of 9 million people before the famine. What are we now? We're a population of 5 million people. Where did we all go to? We went to the four corners of the world, and we had to cope with great stress and with great hardships indeed as well. So if anybody should understand the issues around immigration and the problems, it is we the Irish. But I'm amazed how some of us have not understood this.
Well, panel, Jerome, Kasia, Linda Thomas, Kevin, Gerard, Jane and Conor, thank you very much indeed. Please thank our panel.